32 past the hour, the Biden administration has released more than 13,000 records into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But thousands more documents are still being held. All of the files should have been made public under a 1992 law. And with yesterday's release, about 90% of all documents related to the 98%, related to the 1963 assassination have now been made public. Just 3% of the records remain redacted in whole or in part, according to the National Archives, which controls the JFK assassination records collection.
All right, let's bring in NBC News senior national political reporter Marc Caputo. He's been covering this story also with us. Author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Marc, let's start with you. You know, it seems like they released all the records we needed to see, except the records that we needed to see. Like, for instance, the shadowy CIA figure that ran the covert Cuba operation who met Oswald 4 months before the assassination. They decided not to release those records. What gives?
Right. The guy's name is George Joannides. And under the 1992 law that Mika just referenced, it created the structure to have a warehouse, a JFK collection under the National Archives. Well, the documents that this nonprofit group that sued to get all of these records released, the Mary Farrell Foundation, had found in separate sort of reporting and snooping around, there are probably about 44 records related to George Joannides that never made it into the JFK collection. So as a result, when the Biden administration's like, woohoo, we've released all these records, look at all the transparency, the reality is that there are these records about George Joannides' pro-Castro, or better said, anti-Castro group, that somehow came into contact with Lee Harvey Oswald 4 months before the shooting. Lee Harvey Oswald somehow went to Mexico, somehow made contact with the Cuban and Soviet embassies and built up his name publicly as a pro-Castro sympathizer. And so immediately after the shooting, all of a sudden the news media and the public had all this access to Lee Harvey Oswald sort of being a communist and, again, a pro-Castro sympathizer. And all of a sudden, at the time, right after the shooting, there was this belief that, oh, my God, it's the communists who did it. It's the communists who are behind it. At the same time, there was an operation that was being launched and considered by the Pentagon called Operation Northwoods, which was designed to stage a spectacular false flag terrorist attack in the United States to blame on Castro. And lo and behold, here you have Lee Harvey Oswald. A lot of suspicious stuff, a lot of strange stuff. And the other aspect of George Joannides, whose identity and role in all of this only came out as a result of this law in 1992. Only in the 90s did we find this stuff out. By the way, he died in 1990. Joannides had been appointed after his retirement, pulled out of retirement by the CIA, to be a liaison with the House Investigative Committee in 1976. And the CIA and Joannides never told the House panel, the general counsel, the investigators, hey, by the way, I was involved in this program that made contact with Lee Harvey Oswald 4 months before the shooting. And the CIA to this day will not answer the question why he lied, why they lied. And it's among the many questions they won't answer.
Yeah, it's insane. So Michael, we have been hypercritical of conspiracy theories on this show for years. I mocked and ridiculed truthers who claimed that George W. Bush 9/11 was an inside deal. You know, this is all leading to a but. But let me say this, since I learned this in DBT. And at the same time, there are so many questions that lingered over this. My parents, who were never conspiracy theorists, they never bought the Oswald lone wolf story. Other people I've known, smart people, have never bought that theory. Oswald saying he's a patsy. A couple of days later, he's gunned down by a bar owner, Jack Ruby. Again, so much of it just didn't make sense. My question to you is, Michael, as a historian, first of all, can you shed some light on who killed JFK if he was a lone wolf? But more importantly than that, shouldn't they release every last document 59 years later, unredacted?
They absolutely should, Joe. And, look at it this way. Let's say that, those who were alive at the time of the Kennedy assassination, let's say 2 weeks after Dallas, the United States government just decided to release all sorts of stuff which they would not have released. What would it have shown? It would have given details of Oswald's close contacts with our biggest enemy, the Soviet Union. Same thing with Castro's Cuba. Same thing with anti-Castro Cubans. And also, we would have found out at the time, if these things were released 59 years ago, that Oswald, down to the day of the assassination, was being tracked by the FBI in Dallas, which was even trying to interrogate his wife. They knew that he was on the 6th floor of that book depository where the president was going to go by in this motorcade that had been pre-announced. There were maps in the Dallas newspapers. Same thing with the CIA. What if Americans had learned in December of 1963 that Oswald had close touch with CIA contacts? And also, by the way, that the CIA was trying to kill Fidel Castro. So let's unwind all this. Let's assume that you believe, if you do, that Oswald fired the gun that killed John Kennedy, which the physical evidence probably supports, although there are still many questions. The question is, who was talking to him? Well, he was talking with Soviets. He was talking with Cubans. He was talking with anti-Castro Cubans. And plus, the question that all Americans would have asked then and should ask in 2022, if the FBI was tracking this guy, why didn't they tell the Secret Service, get this guy out of that book depository? He was a Soviet defector. He's a danger to the president. Why didn't J. Edgar Hoover tell that to the Secret Service? And the same thing, why was this lone wolf talking to all these CIA agents? I would say that most people in Dallas were not having meetings with CIA agents. So the question is, why was it kept quiet all these years? If people had found that out then, much less now, because now it's a historical riddle, they would have said the FBI did not do its job. Why should we allow the FBI to go on as it is? J. Edgar Hoover might have even been prosecuted. They might have said CIA contacts with Oswald, November, October 1963, and earlier, that period, they might have said, did the CIA kill John Kennedy? Would have unleashed all sorts of questions. So if you're Lyndon Johnson in 1963, what are the worst secrets you want concealed? These are exactly what they were.
So, Marc, if in fact Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, as the Warren Commission concluded almost 60 years ago, I guess the question is, why not release all the documents to prove that point? Why keep 4,300 or so, at least partially redacted, to allow the conspiracy theories to continue to fester? What's in those documents? Is there a chance at some point we'll see the rest of this stuff?
I think eventually we will. It's just bound to happen. You're asking the eternal question in this case, like, what are they hiding? I think Michael answered it pretty well. In a light most favorable to the government, they're hiding the fact that there were just all of these problems. The CIA, the Defense Department, everything, these are organizations, they're organisms. They have their own culture. They grow, they reproduce, they protect their own. And it's just become part of the culture, and it is the culture of the CIA. It's a spy agency to be secretive. And it's also part of the national security establishment. What's interesting in the lawsuit from the Mary Farrell Foundation is one of the things they asked for is the disclosure of a 1961 memo. This is 2 years before the shooting of John F. Kennedy, from Arthur Schlesinger to Kennedy, saying, hey, let's disband the CIA. Let's get rid of it, because Kennedy wanted to do that after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, this really has nothing to do with the conspiracy to shoot JFK. Again, this is 2 years before that happens. And this is just a historical memo. And the reason the Mary Farrell Foundation asked for that to be disclosed was just as kind of a trial balloon, a test, just to see, hey, is the government going to release this basic historical information? We found out yesterday the answer to that question. It's no. So the document is there, and there are these redactions in it which make no sense. The Biden administration and the various federal agencies, including but not limited to the CIA, are saying, look, we need to protect this information from the public because these are sources and methods, and we don't want to endanger national security. Everyone who spent time looking at this, including various people involved in the various investigations from the government, say that that explanation is just bunk. It's not true. It's false.
Right. You know, Michael Beschloss, anybody that's studied this period and studied the Kennedy presidency, studied Bobby, read as many books as I have on Bobby, know that Hoover despised Bobby Kennedy. Hoover despised JFK. We just heard Marc Caputo explain why the CIA despised the Kennedys. And here you have the CIA hanging out with Oswald right before the killing. You have the FBI knowing where he is and not warning the Secret Service. The question is, do the Kennedys, have the Kennedy family, have they had their suspicions through the years? Did Bobby have his suspicions that it may have been Hoover or the CIA or an inside job that had killed his brother?
Well, as you know from your reading and studying and talking to a lot of these people, absolutely. Bobby Kennedy in 1965 and 1966 told a number of people that he did not necessarily accept the Warren Commission, but the problem there was he was worried that investigating this would open the scab of assassination plots against Fidel Castro that might be traced back to him and his brother. And he felt that, especially since he might run for president in the fairly near future, that was not something he wanted to get enmeshed in. But you're absolutely right. You know, we have to ask these questions, and they are questions. J. Edgar Hoover hated John Kennedy. I don't think he told the local bureau in Dallas, don't help the president, but they certainly knew that Hoover hated Kennedy, and there has to be some reason why the FBI in Dallas did not do its job that day, and Oswald was allowed to be in that building with the rifle sticking out of the sixth-story window, and also why those FBI files were destroyed right after Oswald died a couple of days later. And then the other thing you're saying about the CIA. If Americans in 1963 had been told the CIA had people who were in contact with Lee Harvey Oswald, how many people in the United States and around the world would not have thought the CIA must have plotted against this President Kennedy? And a lot of leaders of the CIA had big qualms about Kennedy's nuclear test ban treaty, settlement of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have no way of knowing whether any of this is true, but we're going to have to keep on asking those questions.
All right. NBC News senior national political reporter Marc Caputo, thank you very much. And presidential historian Michael Beschloss, thank you as well.
And by the way, those